Morning Year 10, hope you've had a good week and welcome to this week's Unseen Poetry video. And the poem this week was Safety Behaviour by Emma Jeremy. Thank you for all your comments and questions on that. Enjoyed reading those as ever. There's three main things I suppose I want to focus on while we're talking about that poem this morning, and those are images, semantic fields and the idea of ambivalence. So I'll say a bit more about those three things that all came out quite a lot in the comments that people sent in a moment. But first, I think we should read the poem. Safety Behaviour. The thoughts I've been told to put somewhere else, so I put them on the roof. I put them in a box and post them. I put them in shoes I never wear. I split them up from each other and put each one inside a stranger's pocket to be taken home and washed, so the thoughts drown in several different washing machines. I put them on the wing of an aeroplane, inside a hollow bit of wall. I tie them to balloons and they fly off. I put them in the ocean and they swim away. I hold them over a candle and they evaporate. I hide, bake them inside an enormous delicious cake, 7 tiers high, and I give a piece of it to everyone. Okay, so a succession of things then in this poem that the speaker does with these thoughts, or has been told to do with these thoughts, and that maybe is one of the first links to the poem we looked at last week, Hound. In Hound, Ben Wilkinson's speaker was telling us to do various things. This speaker says she's been told to do these certain things, and both of them are linked to thoughts or linked to a kind of mental state or condition. So let's think about those three things then. So this poem is a whole list of images or metaphors. All of them, as a few of you pointed out, not personified, but make these thoughts, which are obviously abstractions, and then visible into physical objects. So we'll talk about why she done that, and why these images, why does she kind of concretize these thoughts as objects in these particular ways. And semantic fields as well. When we look at the list of images, we'll start to make connections between them. Certain topics recur. Why is that? And they're both really useful from an exam point of view as well. If you get an unseen poem in the exam and think, actually, I'm not totally sure about the meaning of this poem, or I'm not totally sure what this poem's saying, what you can do is zoom in on one image that sticks out, or maybe a few different connected images that stick out to you, and talk about what are the connotations of those images, what do those specific images mean to you, without having to understand everything in the whole poem. And actually, when you look at those images, it might unlock the rest of the poem anyway. Semantic fields are particularly good because it gives you a chance to talk about language, because you're talking about the words or images within those semantic fields, but also structure, because you're talking about how and why certain ideas are repeated through the poem. And then the third thing, this idea of ambiguity and ambivalence. Well, one of the things I said right towards the start of the year about poetry is that poems are polyvalent. In other words, they admit and hold inside them different meanings at one and the same time. And those meanings might depend on the experience or the ideas or the worldviews that we ourselves bring to the poem, as well as the actual ideas of the poet, him or herself. And these are connected words. So ambiguity is where something's unclear. Does it mean one thing or another thing? And often ambiguity is a mistake or a flaw. If something's ambiguous, that's often a criticism. But not always. People do talk about constructive ambiguity. Ambivalence is not quite the same as ambiguity, and it's not quite the same as polyvalence either. It's a bit more specific than that, and I think this poem is a good example of it. So if you're ambivalent, you've got mixed feelings, or to put it a little bit more accurately and a little bit more strongly than that, I think ambivalence is where you almost have two opposite feelings at once. be happy and sad at the same time. Maybe when school closed, which a long time ago now, nearly 3 months ago, some of you were, I would imagine, ambivalent, because you were sort of happy you're going to have time off school. It's okay if people would admit that, but at the same time, you were worried about what it meant in terms of staying safe, and you were concerned that you would miss your friends, you'd miss your favourite lessons, probably English for most people. And it wasn't that you weren't sure how to choose between those thoughts and feelings. I think this will be true for some people, and some of it's true for me. It would have been, I imagine, that you had those thoughts at the same time. So contradictory thoughts, it's good that this is happening, it's bad that this is happening, at the same time, not one after the other and fluctuating, but at the same time. And that's what ambivalence is. And I think we see ambivalence in this poem, particularly at the end of the poem, in the image of the cake, which was the image that most people commented on. So we'll spend a bit of time talking about that image at the start of part 2 of the video. Okay, so thinking about the images then to start with, here are some of them, a little bit of a list of some of them. It's not exhaustive, but you can see there's a lot. It's only a short poem, it's 12 lines long, and there are a lot of images. What do we notice about them? Well, we might notice that some of them have things in common. So the cake, which is not actually on the list, is it? Yes, it is, yeah, sorry. The cake matches up with the balloons and the candles. They're things that we might expect at a party or a celebration. But the candles might also have other connotations, which we'll look at later on in the video. The balloons certainly do, because the balloons could join another group with the aeroplane in terms of flight. And then the aeroplane, we might think about travel, and that might link in with the posting something, and even the ocean, we travel across the ocean. Perhaps the shoes as well, although that's undercut a little bit by the fact that the voice of the poem says that they're shoes that she never wears. Posting a package, well, it talks about putting something in a box and posting it. Well, putting something in a box is hiding it away. Something might be hidden away in a pocket. So we have another group starts to emerge, except hiding away is a little bit more negative than perhaps saying we're keeping something safe. I'll keep that in my pocket so I don't lose it. I'll keep that in a special box so I don't lose it. So we get images that overlap with each other, images that have different layers of meanings, and images that come into certain categories. We also get some images that feel quite like what we expect in a poem. Perhaps balloons and candles and the ocean. We'd think, yeah, you'd see that in a poem, but not so much a washing machine. One student rightly asked, what's the reason for using everyday items such as washing machines to be a metaphor in the poem? I don't think many poems use a washing machine as a metaphor or as a meaningful image. Why is that? Well, maybe if this is about someone's life, it wants and needs to include the stuff of everyday life. So it doesn't just want to be poetic images, it wants to be mundane, everyday images. Next quote, these are all quotes from your communications here on the screen now. So the next one talks about the sheer number of them. There are a lot of images, and that says something about she's really keen to get rid of these thoughts because she's doing it in lots and lots of different ways. And then a couple more just about the images and the idea of objects. So the worries are displayed as objects the protagonist is trying to get rid of, rather than, as we said before, something conceptual. I mean, a worry, I suppose, is something you can't pin down and see. And the idea, what if you were to ask the question, why turn a worry into an object? Well, some psychologists say because then it's easier to deal with if it's a thing rather than an abstraction. And this moves on to maybe, well, what is the poem driving at? Some people ask, well, what is this poem? What point is it making about mental health? Well, there's a couple of suggestions here. This student says it's important to accept these things. The protagonist is trying to get rid of them, and that's not going to work. It's a one-sided battle, and maybe we can tell that by linking to the previous student's comment. If she could get rid of them that easily, there wouldn't be so many. They obviously keep coming back because they're on the roof, it doesn't work. They're in the post, it doesn't work, and so on. And then a fourth student says she could be trying to show how not to handle certain situations by hiding your thoughts when the best method is sharing them, and that's definitely something we'll come back to. Okay, so to look at the first part of the poem, like I say, then we'll look particularly at that cake image in part 2. The thoughts I've been told to put somewhere else. Well, that idea of ambiguity is right there in this first line, and the commas sort of add to it, because one meaning, my interpretation of this was, right, she's been to see a psychiatrist or something like that, or a counsellor, or perhaps she's just spoken to a friend, and the advice is put the thoughts somewhere else. But at the same time, we can read the line in different ways, because one student said, well, we could read it, the thoughts I've been told, as in what she'd been told, what secrets has she been burdened with, someone else's thoughts, which actually are causing her this distress. Both possible. And a third interpretation of this line, which I find really interesting, one person said, it almost feels sarcastic. It doesn't feel like this is good advice. The commas slowing it down maybe add to that. The thoughts I've been told to put somewhere else. And then she goes through all these surreal and bizarre ways, including the washing machine. What's the washing machine doing here? To get rid of these thoughts. And that makes it seem like it's a sort of ironic or sarcastic comment on the fact that it's impossible to put. How can you put a thought somewhere else? So she's almost mocking that advice or critiquing that advice. So different interpretations of that line and different interpretations of the poem. Just to comment on the rest of this opening bit, we talked about putting them in a box, so that idea of hiding, which we'll come back to. Put them in shoes I never wear. Well, one person said, well, that's quite a sad image because it suggests a bit like maybe the character in Hound. She doesn't go out, she's stuck because these thoughts are in her shoes and naturally they're limiting her. And we can link that a little bit to the middle part of the poem, because before the end of this part 1 of the video, I just want to touch on a few semantic fields in the poem. And one is that of travel, the wing of an aeroplane, the balloons fly off, the thoughts are in the ocean, they swim away. These thoughts are going all over the place, but she's stuck at home. So you've got that ironic contrast, which is quite sad. In both the opening bit and in this bit of the poem, we see quite a lot of what's called caesura, when we have a pause, full stop in the middle of a sentence. In that first bit, it's only 3 lines, but we've already had, 4 sentences. And one student suggested that shows that stop-start nature of the poem, shows that she can't escape. Repeatedly, she's trying to get rid of these thoughts, but it's not working. And the structure of the poem underlines that. What else do we see, just briefly before half-time, in this middle part of the poem? Well, one person commented on positive images, aeroplane, balloons, ocean. It's all quite positive, isn't it? And the cake adds to that later. So unlike in Hound, where it's very negative, on the surface we have a lot of positive things here. And maybe she's trying to think positive thoughts to get into a more positive mental state. Then again, another student picked out the idea of violence. So the thoughts are going to drown in several different washing machines. I tie them to balloons. Well, not the balloon bit maybe, but if you've been tied to something, that's quite violent. Hold them over a candle. Yeah, some of these choices in terms of vocabulary and image can be read as bringing in this idea of violence into the poem, which this student suggested shows how desperate she is to struggle against these thoughts, the desperation of her situation. So again, then we have that sort of ambiguity, because is it violent? Is it positive? Well, we've seen it's both. Those 2 things exist together in this poem, and that's that idea of ambivalence, which we're going to look at quite a bit more in the second half of the video when we look at particularly that last image in the poem, the cake. So I'll see you shortly for part 2.